typically see these lists online. The most hated video game characters of all time. I know this list is definitely outdated because there are some characters that are definitely deserving to be on this list, especially a certain character from The Last of Us Part 2. But this is the current list of the most hated characters. Not many people really vote on this list anymore, but yeah, this is the current list of the most hated characters. For some reason, Zoe's on this list of, The Last of Us characters. But the number one character is Porky Minch. But is he really? But isn't that a villain's job, is to make you hate them? Well, there are two types of villains. Villains that you can relate to and villains you downright hate. A lot of villains that are downright meant to be hated are considered still good villains. Good villains, you're supposed to dislike them. You're supposed to despise them. You're supposed to want to defeat them, giving you a motive to defeat them. Porky Minch is the main villain of Earthbound and Mother 3. Actually, Earthbound and Skygas, but still basically it's Porky Minch. Porky Minch is basically the main villain of the Earthbound series besides Gygas. He's basically an immortal guy who basically time traveled, and he can't walk anymore, so he basically created his own mech. So basically, he took over the remains of the human society, and basically became the eternal ruler of this world, the eternal ruler of the remains of the human society. He's basically became the self-aggrandizing narcissistic monarch of the Tasmanian Island, essentially. He was basically like Kim Jong-un. Basically, the closest person alive to Porky Minch is probably Kim Jong-un of North Korea, which I wouldn't be surprised if Porky Minch took inspiration off of Kim Jong-un, not Donald Trump. Considering that Kim Jong-un basically became the leader of North Korea, and acts basically the same way as Porky Minch, who basically is acting the same way. Other antagonists became way worse, but everyone seems to put the biggest towards Porky. He's the one character that seems to everybody seems to hate, basically. And Porky and another reason why people hate Porky is that you don't really get to defeat him. You don't get satisfaction of seeing the villain get beaten. He gets put into the absolutely safe capsule, and basically since he's immortal, he basically is stuck in there forever. Which, my question, if he's immortal, then why does he need to be in the absolutely safe capsule to begin with? Thus he can mock you. Again, he probably is just going to be in there until he finds some other planet or some other place to take over. And considering that he is immortal, you can't really kill him anyways. It's impossible to kill him, essentially. So actually, it's the best fate to give Porky. Considering that he is an immortal villain, the best fate to give him is to basically seal him up. It's the same fate that Garlic Jr. had in the Dragon Ball Z movie. Considering that Garlic Jr. is immortal, the only way to really defeat him is to seal him away. And that's what Porky essentially did. But unlike Garlic Jr., Porky essentially sealed himself away. He sealed himself away and essentially there. But all the horrible things that happened to your Mother 3, including the entire world ending, is all his fault. Every horrible thing that has happened is all Porky's fault. Which gives you reasonable enough reason to hate him. A reasonable enough reason to hate him. But villains are supposed to do bad things. That's the thing. Villains are not supposed to be good people. They're supposed to be bad. There are some villains we can have some sympathy with. For example, Thanos from Infinity War. The only reason why he wants to snap half of all life out of existence is essentially because his homeworld suffered from overpopulation. He was scared that the universe would also suffer from the same fate. But Porky, he just is a bad person. He's just a childish brat. But the whole point is you're supposed to hate him. You're supposed to dislike him. And that's another reason that makes a good villain. Good villain, not every good villain has to be a total badass that beats up the hero's characters, and at the end the hero beats him at the end. A good villain can be hateable as well. The other best comparison is Frieza from Dragon Ball Z. The Frieza has absolutely no redeeming qualities at all. like Porky Minch. Absolutely zero. Yes, he did help in the Tournament of Power, but pre-Dragon Ball Super, Frieza had no redeeming quality. He was a sadistic, evil tyrant that basically ruled with an iron fist, very similar to Porky Minch. And yet he's considered the best Dragon Ball Z villain of all time. Basically. Agree. And yeah, people do hate Porky Minch because you don't really get to defeat him. But yeah, Porky Minch is definitely deserving of the title most hated game character. But the worst game character, definitely not. Because that means because putting him on the most hated game characters list means that he did a damn good job at being a villain. The same thing can apply with Getsis from Pokemon Black and White, which constantly appears on the most hated video game characters list. Basically, he is not a good person either. He is one of the greatest villains of Pokemon. He is absolutely so evil, which makes him so great, which is what makes a good villain. Villains are supposed to be evil and are supposed to be hated. There are some villains. If you want to really look up worst villains, there are a list of bad villains in games and movies. Villains are just completely horrible. But a lot of villains are supposed to be evil. You're supposed to root against them. And, that's why you have a list of best villains, essentially. There's a list of best villains, and I think Porky deserves to be up there with the best villains like Handsome Jack and other evil villains. Characters that are not really supposed to be redeemed. For example, Frieza from Dragon Ball Z is on this one, essentially on this best anime villains of all time list, essentially. But there are some villains that, take it too far. Like Sugunoro Boki from Sword Art Online is one example of a villain that just took things too far. There's a fine line with villains. Villains at least have to do stuff that is at least at least it's not Sugo. Sugo is not a good villain in the slightest. Porky, you're supposed to hate him. He is basically just an evil ruler that does horrible things to his citizens. And basically it's just a big massive douchebag and a big massive jerk. Basically. Agree. And yeah, he is not a bad villain, basically. He is a pretty good villain, considering he's always on those most hated characters list. And he's never really on the worst game characters list. Because, compared to other ones. Because at least he does his job as a villain. So, when you compare him to characters like Bubsy the Bobcat, who is definitely one of the worst characters in all of fiction, Porky isn't really seem that bad in comparison. And yeah, there are people who do think he's a bad villain. But yeah, Ridley also did bad things as well, and other Nintendo villains. But they're beloved by the fans. I think in the future, basically, he will no longer be considered one of the worst Nintendo villains of all time. He's a villain where you're kind of supposed to despise him and supposed to hate him. And this list is just terrible to begin with Sonic the Hedgehog being on this list, despite being one of the most beloved gaming characters of all time. So yeah. Does Porky deserve the hate he gets? Yeah. But is he really a bad villain? No. Because you're supposed to hate him. You're supposed to dislike Porky Minch. The same thing applies to Frieza from Dragon Ball Z. He is just an evil character. And he does make the game more depressing as well. Well, but again, he is the villain. If there was no villain in Murder 3, then it would be a terrible game. Goodbye.